Hello and welcome to this discussion on disease surveillance. For this particular video, I'd like to show you an example of a surveillance system. I happened to come across this. This is back from the late 90s flu season, but it shows several different important features about surveillance systems. So one of the things that I wanted to show is the kinds of information that is portrayed with surveillance kind of data. And this comes from the MMWR, which is the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And you can sign up for this for free. It just comes to your email and they send it to you. Typically weekly, sometimes it's a little longer in between. But this is the kind of thing where as different diseases are progressing, they try to give information about those reportable diseases. And so disease surveillance is often looking at a passive surveillance system. And by passive surveillance, what that means is we have a system in place where we can collect information, and we're dependent on those doctors' offices, clinics, laboratories, hospitals, nursing homes to send information in to the county health department or other place that we are collecting information so that it can be tallied. And we can watch and see exactly what's happening. And so here we see the level of influenza activity, and it could be that it's no activity, sporadic, regional, or I think level 4 is widespread. And so you can see the different states where it looks like we're having more of an issue, and sometimes we can see a pattern and possibly a way that we would want to then intervene once we see where the issues are happening. The next thing that I want to show you about this is and they talk about the epidemic threshold, but they talk about it again below here. So this is what this graph kind of brings together several of the different areas that we've talked about already in infectious disease. And one of those concepts is about things being epidemic or endemic. And because influenza is a seasonal disease, you can see how the threshold or the level at which we would expect it to be kind of fluctuates as it goes throughout the year. As it's in the middle of the year, kind of like weeks 25 through 40-ish, we see that those levels are expected to be lower. And as we get to the winter months, those are expected to be higher. And these are as percentages of of all deaths, and they're looking specifically at 122 cities in the United States for a specific time frame. You can see where these spikes happen. That's exactly what the surveillance system is for. So we have kind of this early warning system about kind of what's happening, and we can see if something is rising above the level where we would expect it, so that we know that we're going to need to put more resources towards this particular disease at a given time. And what you'll notice is here we have the epidemic threshold is 1.645 standard deviations above the seasonal baseline. And so if you remember, this is approximately like our one-sided 95% confidence interval Z value, roughly. And so we wouldn't expect it to be above a certain area, a certain level for any given time. And so what this allows us to do then is to see exactly when it crosses that threshold, so that we know when things are happening more often than usual. The other thing to keep in mind, so this is likely based on a lot of passive surveillance information. Sometimes when we have a specific disease of interest, we might also have active surveillance of that particular disease, and that's where not only do we have a database that's set up so that we can collect the information, but we also send people to the laboratory or to the doctor's office or to the hospital so that we can look through charts and make sure that we're not missing any of those cases. The main downside with passive surveillance is that we tend to have a specific percentage of them that are underreported. Either the doctor knows about that particular case, but they don't have a regular system in place for their particular doctor's office that makes sure that those are sent into the reportable diseases center, or they have the symptoms and they think, well, it could be that, but maybe it's something else. They don't necessarily get a definitive test, and so that is something that's never reported. So passive surveillance has the downside of underreporting, whereas active surveillance is much more time consuming, but they're more likely to capture a higher percentage of the cases. So I think there's a note down here that says all four components of the influenza surveillance system indicate that the activity is declining in the United States. So it would be interesting to find out what are the four components of the influenza surveillance system. So these are the kinds of ways that we use this infectious disease information that we've learned all along to apply it to a real public health issue. Surveillance is a perfect example, and infectious diseases go way back to the very beginning of public health in the United States and in the world. So I hope that has been helpful in terms of thinking about disease surveillance and understanding what active and passive surveillance are.